I don't think there's some global conspiracy from pharma, but there is a business model around, if you're a hospital CEO, you want to have your beds filled. We don't practice healthcare, we practice sick care.
Around the anti-vaxxer movement, do they have anything right? Was there anything wrong with the COVID vaccine?
We're being now led by, in some cases, fear and folks who are anti-science with certain agendas, in some cases making money on this. And the fact that we have RFK Jr. as our U.S. lead for health and human services is at the beginning of a huge tragedy for biomedical science, which is now being defunded. It's bold to all of us, if we really want to see true health and medicine for all, to validate the science in smart ways and not get your science from Joe Rogan.
Do you think we'll reach this longevity escape velocity, this biological, physical immortality in our lifetimes? What do you hope someone will get out of our conversation today?
That's a great question. I think maybe a bit of the art of the possible. I mean, where are things now, near, and next in health and biomedicine? There's obviously, as we can talk about, a lot of hype and hope and a lot of promise. And it's always interesting to me to see where people think the future is and maybe help catalyze that in smart, effective ways.
I love that. And you famously said in a podcast, I'm saying it's famous, it's going to become famous, I think, that you are not a futurist, you're a Now-ist. Tell us what that means.
I must have said that somewhere. It's like, it's hard to be a futurist because, you're going to be wrong most of the time. But the interesting possibility is also another famous quote, not by me. The future's already here, just not evenly distributed. Or the future's coming faster than you think. Lots of folks have used those in different forms. But the more interesting thing is, how do you apply some of these futuristic things and make them translate to reality today, not waiting for 5, 10, 15 years. In some cases, the future's arrived. The trick is making it accessible and equitable. The magic around us, from Waymos to the next generation wearables, are pretty extraordinary, but they're not often tapped into healthcare in the ways that they could be.
Yeah. You said that again. I'm going to repeat another quote here, but you said it's a lot of it is around mindset, as in we are building. So the question is whether we have the mindset to build for 2050 today, and the winners will have that mindset, and the losers, unfortunately, will be stuck in the past.
And who's going to even exist in 2050 era from today's sort of healthcare metrics? The challenge with health and medicine as a physician is it's a bit risk averse, right? It's a little incremental versus exponential. We have a lot of exponential technologies.
Yeah.
Like we're now this week 3 years into ChatGPT, right? And AI is just one example. It's moving faster than regulatory, reimbursement, policy, ethics. There's a lot of plus sides. There's also some dangerous sides. You can bioengineer a virus, or you can 3D print a medicine. So in terms of the 2050 vision, mindset matters in terms of how do you sort of create the art of the possible, understand where some of the barriers are, because often they're not technological. They're social. They're belief systems. There's incentive challenges, particularly in whether it's NHS or down the street at Stanford, in terms of how we pay for health rather than disease. How do we integrate a wearable device into the workflow of a primary care doc or into a community health worker? So mindset, and also sort of seeing where the puck is going, matters, because most innovators, they're sort of building for today, and they realize that by the time they launch their product, whether it's an app, a device, a drug, an AI agent, things are going to keep evolving, sometimes quicker than we expect. So the mindset needs to be a bit about super convergence and connecting the dots, and then aligning the incentives for whatever system you might be in.
You've done, I'm going to say, 5 or 6 TED Talks?
4 TED Talks and 2 TED Talks.
Okay. So there's clearly a curious and appetite for what's to come. What drives Daniel Kraft?
The most fun thing for me is, I went down the street to medical school at Stanford. I did the traditional academic training in internal medicine, and combined with pediatrics, so I couldn't pick one thing, and then did hematology, oncology, and bone marrow transplant. But I remember being in medical school going, gosh, I kind of like everything. And I was always one of those sort of gadget freaks, always been an early adopter. I had the first Hewlett-Packard 200LX pocket computer in the late 90s, the fun thing for me is often connecting dots between technologies, people's ideas, and unmet needs. So what drives me is how do we create a better future of health and medicine writ large, as a large continuum, right? From prevention, diagnostics, therapy, to public, to global health. How do you sort of take some of these emerging, sometimes magical technologies and bring them to impact and bring the people together often that can catalyze that shift in meaningful ways?
It's interesting because the abundance of technology is right here. You mentioned Omics. Can you explain actually what Omics are to someone who might not know?
Omics, I mean, everyone's familiar probably with the genome. You can now sequence your own genome for about $80 on the way to a $10 genome. There's also other omes. There's the proteome, all the proteins floating in your blood that change very dynamically. There's the microbiome, the bugs on your gut and in your stomach and on your skin that play a role in health. There's the sociome. There's the other omics as well that are all interesting, but when you put them together and mash them up, that's where we can kind of get a picture of you or me and a bit of a digital twin enablement that can really help us guide true precision and personalized health and care. So Omics is just one part of that, but now it's getting faster, cheaper, more available. The trick is, how do you plug it in to clinical care? Do you sequence every baby before they're born? How do I take your pharmacogenomics, the genes that impact how you metabolize everything from aspirin to a statin or to a longevity drug, or one that might be a longevity drug, and use that relevant to you, not the average human, because none of us are average.
You also mentioned behaviorome, phenome, digitome.
Right. The digitome is getting super interesting because now we're exuding our digital exhaust all the time, right? From our voice as a biomarker, which changes if you're jet lagged or drunk or manic or depressed. Voice can now pick up not just mental health elements, but pick up early signs of neurologic changes like Parkinson's or ALS. The sound of your cough, as demonstrated during COVID, could tell whether you have a cold, a croup, or COVID, or tuberculosis. There's a group that presented at my Next Med Health conference from Click Labs that can now listen to your voice and predict your blood sugar and your blood pressure. So that's not going to probably be the way you manage your blood pressure, but you can screen folks who have early signs of diabetes or hypertension and pick them up early. So that's one example of the digitome. And most folks are, familiar with the wearables. I've got my Apple Watch and my Whoop like you have on. I've got my new Oura ring and my older Ultrahuman ring and my wedding ring and a few other wearables. And they're all exuding interesting data.
Yeah.
And the wearables themselves are getting a bit commoditized. The interesting thing is, what do you do with those different streams from your steps and your sleep and your HRV and your temperature, and give you some sort of personalized insight, not just at that moment, but from where Daniel or Julian are over time. Like if my resting heart rate when I'm sleeping is 55 or so on average, and it starts to creep up to 70 over a month, maybe something is going on cardiovascularly, and I could use that as an enabled human and consumer and patient, or potentially your health agent or your doc or your health system is looking at that and be proactive and looking at changes. And we're starting to see that embed into our current consumer wearables.
Because we've been hearing this move towards reactive to proactive over the last 5 years, and we're starting to see some of these tests and these devices become more clinically grade or medical grade. What's next? So
the now, if you look past, Fitbit only launched roughly 15 years ago, right? That was the first consumer wearable. That would start with your steps and evolved dramatically, now owned by Google. And now the next generation wearables can clearly do heart rate and temperature and O2 stat, and some are starting to do blood pressure. And soon what's next is it'll probably do quasi-accurate blood sugar and maybe other lab things from cortisol to potassium. But, we don't need to wait for the next generation wearables. We can take the current ones. Think of the power of the supercomputer in your wristwatch, or what fits, on an exponential technology like a smart ring. What's next is making sense of that data. And it's just starting to emerge, right? You don't just get your sleep score or your steps for the day. It can give you context. They're starting to add in these little health agents that can go, wow, you just arrived from the UK, you're jet lagged. You really don't need to do your workout today. And maybe you should get to bed at this time to optimize your rest for being proactive and productive the next week. They can start to look at things over months and years and compare you to others like you and see where things are trending. So the spot data isn't interesting, the actual one-time blood pressure or heart rate or O2 stat or steps or sleep. What does that mean over context over time? And where that gets really interesting is when that becomes part of our sort of continual physical exam. And if I'm your primary care doc, I'm not going to see you once a year and say, what did you have for breakfast last week? How are you feeling? I'm going to sort of see these integrated trend lines. And if you have hypertension or diabetes or any condition, I'll be able to sort of see the digital biomarkers for that and start to adjust what you might need. Myself as your clinician, or increasingly our health agents will integrate that data along with your other multimodal health metrics.
But it is crazy that till now, someone goes into their GP's office or their physician's office in the US and will tell the doctor, hey, there are these things that I feel along with me. And so much of it is subjective to the individual's thoughts on themselves. And sure, there are ways to get measured and to check biomarkers and all that. But the beauty of this is that you have a constant ability to listen in to what's happening across someone's body, across multiple biomarkers. So it's exciting, but it's weird how slow it's taken us to get here.
Yeah, when I talk to fellow physicians, I ask often, how many of you ever prescribed a wearable to your patients? Something as simple as how many steps have you taken? If you're, let's say, an orthopedic surgeon, there's this idea now of mobility as a vital sign. How are you walking? The current wearables can tell whether you might have a hip issue, or if you're likely to have a fall, or let's say you send someone home from a total hip replacement. As a clinician, you might want to know, are they walking more each day as you hope, as expected, or they're walking less each day? Something's going on. The hip implant wasn't done properly. There's an infection or something else going on. So there's a big disconnect right now between the availability of all these data streams and integrating into the workflows of yourself as a human, to your doctor, to your nutritionist, to your workout coach. And I think where AI is going to be so powerful is we're going to have these always-on agents that can be sifting through our digital detritus, both, knowing what we did last summer, knowing our base genomics, but also looking and sniffing through how we're interacting on our mobile devices. How's our voice changed? There's not just wearables. There's this idea of sweatables now. They can look at your sweat if you're running a marathon. There's ingestibles that might look at your GI tract. There's metabolomics from a continuous CGMs. It's almost overwhelming how many new data streams we have. The trick is getting meaning and insight. And even I'd use the word wisdom, because, a good doctor can kind of suss through things and have hopefully a good relationship and figure things out over time. But if we can start to connect the dots between this data and make it contextual intelligence, not just artificial intelligence, that can move the needle and hopefully open up access to sort of continuous primary care to everybody on the planet.
We have just launched the Beyond Tomorrow community, and I would love for you to be a part of it. Think masterminds with some of your favorite podcast guests, dinners and events in your city, accountability groups, free giveaways, and a space to have all your questions answered. And what's best, it's all for free. Just check out the link in the description below or head to school.com/beyond-tomorrow. That's skool.com/beyond-tomorrow. There's going to be a lot of people thinking that we are getting more and more disconnected from our intuition, our ability to listen to our own body. We've been able to do that for X amount of years. Why do we need all this over-measurement right now?
I'd argue we don't always need over-measurement. I think it's a tool like anything else that you can use appropriately. It's not like some folks are quantified selfers, and they're tracking everything from their meals to their sleep to their steps to their nighttime activities. And that's great for some folks. That can get them super engaged in their care, help engage them to do their workouts and do all those proactive Healthspan related activities. But for many diseases, we wait for them to show up. So I'd say all these emerging tools are just that. They're tools. You shouldn't be a slave to any of them. Some folks get over-quantified and they're a slave to their sleep score and they never go have any fun. You could argue, you have a glass of red wine or a few before bed, your sleep is going to be impacted. Doesn't mean you shouldn't ever have some red wine or imbibe other elements that can help with your sociome, your social health.
Yeah.
And I just think the big picture is, we don't practice healthcare, we practice sick care. A sick care model is based on our old structures of medicine. We measure things maybe a couple times a year in the four walls of the clinic or the emergency room or, God forbid, the intensive care unit. So we get very intermittent data, usually in a clinical setting. That means we're reactive. We wait for the patient to show up in the emergency room with a heart attack or a stroke or late stage cancer. And the opportunity now, connecting the dots between these new forms of data collection, is to be much more continuous with our data, much more personalized, making that data contextual, much more proactive, finding problems and diseases far earlier in their progression, and then make that both participatory, so we can share our data and crowdsource it, and then that will drive much better health outcomes, arguably at lower costs, and in a much more integrated way than our very fractured, data poor healthcare, sick care systems of today.
Yeah. I know a lot of people, the majority of people probably need to sleep more. So need a better sleep score or need to improve their VO2 max. I'm sure it's not as high as Peter Attia's or what he says is the right benchmark. I definitely know my grip strength isn't as strong as his 2 minutes. I think they're the dead hang. But I think one of the issues that I saw in the last couple of years was that everyone became, or a lot of people, especially in the biohacking space, became ultra obsessed around these metrics, sleep score, VO2 max, for the Whoop users as maybe their stress monitor or getting their recovery scores up. But what was forgotten, as you mentioned just now, was were people still enjoying their lives? Were they being social enough? Were they part of a rich community? I know Tina Woods has recently released as part of a collective this joy score, this joy score rating. When will we get a perfect metric that really resembles actually a true score of a true life score?
Well, yeah, as you know, there are a lot of folks trying to crack that nut and give you some overall age score, right? How do you measure aging or health span or metabolic health? Is it just your CGM number? Is it your VO2 max, your grip strength? Those might be relevant to certain populations at certain points in time, but it's not necessarily going to really translate to how long you're going to live or the quality of your life. And if you're spending all your time in the gym and going to bed at 8 o'clock at night, what are you missing out on? And we all know, there's some debate about the accuracy of the blue zones, but those folks didn't grow up with Whoops and wearables or genomics or blood tests. We know that sense of purpose and community and, having folks you grow up with over time can be much more impactful. And doing social, sometimes unhealthy things like having some wine can be not just improve quality of life, but health span, which I think we all sort of want to engage in. So I think there's a downside to being over-quantified. At the same time, we need to build the data sets so that you don't just believe some influencer or podcaster about, oh, you need to maximize VO2 max and take this supplement and NAD this and adaptogen that or peptide this. How do we sort of glean and crowdsource knowledge from hopefully millions and thousands of folks sharing their data to build better health maps to reach us? I always use the example from Google Maps or Waze. I used to drive with paper maps. I'm old enough for that. Now you can't imagine driving without those technologies. Yeah. I think for the health consumer and folks who want to improve their health span and lifespan, we can start to crowdsource some of that knowledge when we're all integrating data and sharing that in new, impactful ways.
Paint us a picture of what the future looks like to you. The future now.
The future now. Well, I made a little post the other day. So we're here in Menlo Park, 30 miles from San Francisco. And some folks may have been to San Francisco or a few other U.S. cities and been on the first Waymo ride. Waymos are autonomous vehicles. Pretty crazy that 20 years ago, it was like maybe 25 years ago, there was the first DARPA challenge to get self-driving cars. And the first year, they almost all fell off the track, right? Then pretty rapidly evolved. And now it's pretty credible, but you can press a button on the app. And now as of last month, they'll come to this neighborhood, outside of San Francisco and pick you up. And the analogy I used is that, a self-driving car like a Waymo comes on demand, shows up with your initials DK. I know it's mine, right? It has transparent pricing. I can compare it to Uber and Lyft and even the robo-taxis. It adapts the route based on crowdsourced knowledge and if there's traffic or weather. It's built those maps from thousands of other Waymos going down the same streets. And the analogy from maybe the future of healthcare, could we have more self-care? Not necessarily a self-driving car that takes you to your clinic, or actually in some cases, the clinic might come to you in these sort of embodied health pods. But that, care could be more connecting all those crazy dots, GPS, LiDAR, crowdsourced maps, robotics, and having to align with regulatory, what can fit on the roads. So I imagine a future of healthcare, and maybe overextending the Waymo analogy, that is a bit on demand, a little bit self-health enabled, because you don't need to have often a human in the loop. There's no driver in these cars, but you can call one in virtually when you need one. That is sort of always on. The system, there's lots of challenges with our fractured healthcare systems, but it's integrated. It's learned from thousands of other journeys and can kind of help you go to where you want to go to get to your running a marathon or living to 120 or managing a particular risk or condition. The failure of that analogy is easy to poke holes in, but I would hope the future of health and medicine is a little more Waymo meets Uber. There's the easy button. It's integrated. It's taking multiple streams of information you never even have to be aware of to guide and help you on your health journey, no matter who and where you are. Because if you're a 20-something trying to optimize Healthspan versus a 70-something, you need you need a different engine, a different path. If you have a particular disease, I'm an oncologist, like a cancer, pick something in common like lung cancer, realizing it's one of several thousand subtypes that need to be managed differently using all this new forms of multimodal data. So I hope the shift is that we can use new forms of digital biomarkers, omics, crowdsourced information to, again, identify who's at risk for certain diseases proactively on your journey, guide your course to never have that crash of that car, kind of that check engine light can come on early to let you know you have a early cardiac issue or a sleep issue or a mental health challenge, and get you to the care you need, sometimes digitally, sometimes virtually, sometimes in person. And that can happen upstream of where we pick disease up now, which is late and expensive and often based on randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trials, which aren't really applicable to almost anybody in real life. So that's one picture.
Can I just poke one hole in?
Sure, there's lots of holes there.
I think with again, Waymo, great example. I was yesterday in Uber and had a lovely chat with someone who recently moved here 5 years ago from Turkey, and we conversed over a number of things, my experience of being in Turkey, the great Turkish food. I got out with a smile on my face, social connection hit. What I find with all this optimization, automation, we let go of some of the most important things. And so I just want to poke a slight hole in what the hospital of the future and who benefits ultimately as well.
Yeah, I mean, health is inherently social. The sociome we touched on. Your patient-doctor relationship, if you're lucky to have one, is often very both healing and proactive. If I'm your primary care doc and I get access, let's say, to your Oura Ring, and even if I never look at it, Dr. Kraft might be tracking my sleep and my exercise regime. That Hawthorne effect, thinking you're being watched, can be powerful, and you want to do things for your doctor in some cases. That's not everybody. So I'm by no means trying to advocate that we should just have robo-docs and agentic AI taking care of all your healthcare. But at times, given that in many cases there is no doctor available or they're expensive or hard to access, there's that interface where we can blend those two together. And the sort of best example for the overwhelmed clinician of today is that AI is not yet making a diagnosis or making the decision. It actually might be malpractice in a few years not to have used the AI to help do the diagnostic workup or pick the right drug or therapy, but that it can unleash clinicians to be really doing what they really want to be doing, interfacing with their patients using these tools, digital therapeutics, new forms of diagnostics, to sort of be more continuous and collaborative. And that human part of it is really still key. We've been sort of slaves to our keyboard as clinicians, writing and typing in our EMR in most parts of the world. The ambient computing part of AI is starting to relax that challenge. But I think, that experience of having that amazing Uber driver, I had one yesterday as well, from Afghanistan, and talking about his experience, was made the ride amazing. At the same time, not all rides have to have that. And if we want to give and democratize access to health and medicine, some of these tools will not always have to have humans in the loop.
I feel overnight the role of the doctor is going to shift pretty quickly into an individual that is purely there for care, for human connection. Is it going to be sudden?
It's like other things. It's slow, and then sudden, right? The art of the possible today. I have an investment fund where, along with Andrew Ng, I've built an app in India called Jivi.ai, right? And in India, it's not a question of, will AI replace a doctor? For many folks, there just isn't one, right? The bottom billion there, for example. So we started out with the provision of, could you start to build a bit of a health agent, super intelligent AI, leveraging the best of multiple LLMs to, I've got abdominal pain in the middle of the night. Is that appendicitis? Now it's blended into adding in mental health and nutrition and Ayurvedic medicine. It can talk to you in Hindi or in Swahili. And it sort of started with, that unmet need market. But that is sort of the early entry point where anybody at 2 a.m. can have a mental health chat, can challenge their triage. Should I go to the emergency room or not? It might know your multimodal data if you've shared it from Epic or Function Health. So I think the role of the clinician in that case is, yes, can often be helping making decisions, supporting integrative care, helping often in person when people really do have an emergency. I think there's a huge gap right now in primary care. A lot of our foundational medicine depends on optimizing your health span early in life. I'm trained in pediatrics as well. All those things you do in the first, let's say, 5 years are critical. They're often not reimbursed well. Pediatricians aren't paid well. Parents need guidance. Humans need guidance. And sort of these AI agents can sift through a lot of the data, make it super contextual and super relevant. And then the role of the clinician will change. I always wonder, medical students starting at Stanford or anywhere in the world won't finish medical school and training for another 6, 7, 8 years. That's 2033. That's 3 more cycles of ChatGPT. What do they need to know today to be ready for that future? How do you select someone to be a good doctor or nurse or pharmacist? So they need not just good IQ, they need good emotional intelligence, EQ, increasingly. So are they good at organic chemistry or good at human interaction? Are they able to vibe code, or are they able to be good at video games if they're going to be a surgeon? Or are we going to need surgeons as robotic surgery gets more autonomous? All sorts of questions that I don't have the answer to, but the role of the clinician is certainly going to shift.
So let's go into another example. What does the future now look like?
What does the future now look like? I mean, so I run a conference for many years. It was called Exponential Medicine, which is thinking about the pace of change and how technologies on the exponential are interesting, but when you put them together, they converge as they get faster, better, cheaper, from AI to wearables to low-cost 3D printing to nanotech, et cetera. That's where the magic happens. Or as we mentioned earlier, things are often a bit incremental in terms of their adoption. The platform and community I run now is called Next Med Health, where the challenge is to everybody is, what's now? And how do we leverage the power of the now? What's near? So you get a picture of, what do we do with the $10 genome and, ChatGPT 10? And then what's next? How do you think maybe 10 or 20 years out? So I think what's exciting is this ability to do care anywhere, the ability to shift the traditional medicine from the 4 walls to home. It's sometimes the nickname is hospital to home, right? There's the emergence of that field where you admit a patient not to the hospital bed, but to their home to manage a pneumonia or a standard infection. You've got technologies, and I brought a few in my pocket, right, which bring basically an intensive care unit level of sensing from a little patch that'll measure heart rate, temperature, blood pressure, O2 sat, position, et cetera. Stream that into a platform that no one has to look at every raw data feed, but they can have a bit of an operating system to make sense of where the changes or dynamics are. So
what it meant was what mindset do we need now to build for the future? Like what is basically within our grasp, but we just need to have the mindset to build for?
I think what's in our grasp is a bit to democratize health and medicine. Even here in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's hard to get a specialist visit, let alone find a new primary care doc. And so the now is this movement, I think, to a bit more of self-health, right? Where you can, in some cases, increasingly pay out of pocket to get your labs done, to upskill with an AI agent to make sense of that data. You can do it for free on ChatGPT in some cases. Everyone's interested in personalization, but the issue in a lot of health and medicine, pharma, et cetera, is you get the same one-size-fits-all printout, not based on communicating to you on your age, culture, language, personality type goals. I think we can start to add design elements around this. So the now is sort of connecting the dots, giving folks access to their own health information where they can be self-empowered, upskilling clinicians of all sorts, from a community health worker to the nurse to the specialist, and in making sense of this multimodal data to shift proactively how we do health span, diagnostics, therapy, and public and global health.
Are you feeling bullish around health equality?
I'm bullish in that what again used to require thousands of dollars in access, can now come to you on your smartphone. Not to overdo the digital health side of the equation, but everybody on the planet now has basically a smartphone. That gives you, again, sensors on the phone that can basically do your vital signs, listen to your voice as a biomarker, access telemedicine. They're not going to do surgery. They could call in the drone to deliver the medications or the kit. So I'm bullish on the fact that now there's an explosion of innovation. A lot of entrepreneurs out there are building these solutions AI, digital health, et cetera, is where many folks from traditional tech are moving. There's still a challenge in sorting through the noise and making those things useful. So a challenge I've been trying to address with that is a platform I've been building, a website called digital.health. It's literally a platform called digital.health. That's the website where we have now, I think, over 5,000 digital health solutions, from everything from mental health and meditation to managing diabetes to AI algorithm platforms for radiology, so that the art of the possible becomes available now. You're not waiting for a health system to plug it in. You can go find it. You can prescribe an app or a wearable or digital therapeutic to your patient. You can find the ones that match you depending on what care scenario you're in. So in many cases, that future is already here. It's just very fragmented and it's not always available. NHS has a digital health platform. In Germany, they have DIGA, where there's some approved digital health apps that are being paid for. The challenge often is, are clinicians able to prescribe them, understand them, and integrate them into the workflow of their primary care visit or their clinical specialist? And so a lot of it is not about the technology, but connecting the dots and aligning the incentives so that these are used and are impactful.
We say aligning the incentives for who?
Well, unfortunately, we don't practice, in most parts of the world, evidence-based medicine. We practice reimbursement-based medicine, so follow the money. So if you're a cardiologist in San Francisco or London or anywhere, you might get paid to do more catheterizations or more diagnostic cardiovascular exams. Now you could pay out of pocket, or now with insurance, and go get a CT scan done with basically AI-enabled angiography and reconstruct your blood vessels. So we're able to look at someone's cardiovascular risk in new ways that isn't paying the cardiologist in the way they used to be to do a diagnostic catheterization. So that might be moving their cheese. Are they going to like this? Is the cardiology lobby going to allow some of these things to get through the system? Yeah. Another example might be, in my world, I trained initially in primary care and pediatrics and internal medicine. If I'm a pediatrician and a kid has an ear infection, potentially, usually you want to bring them in and you can bill for that visit to look in the ear. Now the parents can use an app on the phone with some modifications to the speaker and microphone and look in the kid's ear essentially and diagnose, is that otitis media, an ear infection? Is it viral, bacterial? Who's going to pay for that? How do you align the incentives so that the physical and the virtual and the digital come together so you can practice good bedside healthcare and good website healthcare in a way that's paid for? COVID was a good example of changing that paradigm. At least in the United States, a lot of virtual visits weren't paid for, and during the global pandemic, a lot of that changed and it unlocked people's first experiences with telehealth or using home-based diagnostics like a COVID test. And we need to continue some of that energy to sort of redesign our health systems to really change the care models going forward, because there's a lot of reluctance and fear, in some cases validated, amongst care systems and clinicians about not being replaced by AI, but changing how they do their work and how they get paid for it.
Because we're talking about the disruption of industries worth trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
And that, so how does one take those on the journey with them and say, hey, insurance industry, hey, clinicians who still work in a reactive system, you can benefit from this, do X, Y, and Z? Or is it just a case that there won't be an industry left?
Healthcare is not going anywhere.
But as in the parts around healthcare as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to find other analogies that are shifting. We're here in the land of electric vehicles, right? The mechanics are no longer changing spark plugs and doing oil changes on your Tesla, right? So the supply chain has changed. How often you need to bring your car in. The whole landscape there is shifting. GLP-1s, which we haven't touched upon, that are arguably great for metabolic disease, but maybe might be healthspan agents, are changing people's weights, and downstream will need less knee replacements and heart bypass surgeries. So there's going to be downstream implications. In some settings, you need a forcing function. And here in the US, we spend 18, 20% of our GDP. It's unsustainable. We're going to need some of the pain of excess costs, where we spend more per capita in the United States. We spend more per capita in the United States on healthcare per person. We get some of the worst outcomes, to bend that cost curve to really be smart about proactive, preventative, and participatory care. But it's going to happen in fragments. Sometimes certain countries, Singapore is a great place where you have a bit of a city state, or smaller countries like Israel where everyone's data is integrated. We see things leapfrog, or places like Africa or India where there is no lobby or old infrastructure. Those are some of the places where the next innovation of systems, or in Neom in Saudi Arabia, where you can reinvent things that won't happen in London or in San Francisco in the same way.
Very interesting. I want to get into crystal ball. 2030.
2030.
It's quite soon.
Yeah.
I need to start saying 2035. But where will we be?
I think we'll start to see the reality of the digital twin. We'll start to see the reality of everybody having access to their own health agent, where you'll just pull up your phone. It won't be an agent that's just stuck on your smartphone. It can be leveraged into your smart home and your Alexa speaker and in your car. And again, it will, with your permission, we'll have looked at all your health data, and that's over time, and have contextual insights. It'll know your preferences and how things are designed that match you, based on, some people want points or badges or social connection. That will hopefully be available for almost everybody. People are building those now.
Just to go, because I know the context of a digital twin, but someone that has never heard of what a digital twin is, can you explain very quickly how that will look if someone was to look at it on their phone?
Yeah, digital twin might be a representation of you. It could literally look like you. It could be an avatar or something you could spin around and you could age it. You could show what it's going to look like if you lose weight, or if you do a certain intervention like going to the gym every day and predict how much buffer you're going to look. It might be looking at your genomics and using modeling predict your risk for a certain cancer. It might predict that you take a personalized cancer vaccine, right, which are becoming reality. So this digital twin idea is a bit of a broad concept, but it might be a digital twin around your heart and reconstructing your blood vessels using a scan and modeling what might be the most appropriate intervention, whether it's a statin or exercise. It might be one around your mental health, but more holistically, I think the exciting element is to unsilo. A lot of healthcare is, different specialties and don't talk to each other. That old image of, 9 wise men touching an elephant and all getting one perspective is to put together your genome, your metabolome, your proteome, your sociome, your exposome, where you've lived. If you grew up in a pollution-borne area, you can have a different lung risk and you might need to be challenged differently. And it might be that digital twin as you interact with it. Again, if you're a PhD in bioinformatics, a very different interface than if you have an 8th grade education. But to zoom back, I think everyone will have something available to that degree. It can take in whatever data you might want to share with it. Not everyone's going to have their scans and their omics done, but it'll give you that first pass for checking a symptom, accessing smart virtual or physical care, adding your knowledge to build that Google Maps and ways of collaborative healthcare journeys that informs the next generation of digital twins. So it's a bit of a buzzword, but the ability for folks to access that in a meaningful way and design for them using agentic AI and generative LLMs is going to be pretty exciting.
What does a cancer-free world look like to you?
Well, I'm an oncologist. And
that's the reason why I asked.
I think I made a joke. I'm looking forward to being out of a job. The cancer-free world, cancer is a very broad element, right? There's been these cancer moonshots. I'm like, you have to go past the moon. There's a whole constellation out there. It's not one cancer. It's not like curing cancer is one target. But I think a cancer-free world is one where, and it's starting to emerge, where part of your annual physical exam, that blood tests like Grail and others from Guardant and others are hopefully at very low cost for the price of a blood count today, able to screen you for most of the common cancers and can pick them up at stage 0, not stage 3 or stage 4. That's one element. First stage, we start to pick up cancers earlier and earlier when we can do something about it, right? Early pancreatic cancer or ovarian that usually present late, for example. So first part is smarter, better screening that gets cheaper and more available. And some of that will be done through lab tests and blood biomarkers. Some could be done through breath as a biomarker. Some companies are developing sort of nano e-noses where you might do a breath test once or twice a year, maybe in your corner pharmacy, that will screen you for most metabolic and other cancers. So that first is picking them up early. 2, that's emerging now is who's at risk, right? We know the issues of BRCA1 and 2 and who has high risk for breast cancer and ovarian, and some folks taking very significant actions proactively before they get it. The near future will be developing personalized cancer vaccines. So if you have a familiar risk or have had a cancer, you might have one built specifically for you or modified one off the shelf using mRNA technologies, for example, to take a cancer vaccine. So that might be, and we have examples of that. HPV vaccines today are very protective around cervical cancer, for example.
Just quickly, BRCA1, BRCA2 for those that might not be familiar with it, and also just the vaccine you just mentioned.
Yeah, there are common genes associated with some common cancers like breast cancer. And most women who develop breast cancer do not have those genes. But if you happen to have a certain form of BRCA1 or BRCA2, much higher risk for getting breast and ovarian. So you can identify that from a 23andMe study, or soon everyone's going to get their own genome done for $10. Then you might be able to make decisions about, I might need a BRCA1 vaccine that's targeted to me, that tunes your immune system to identify early cancers and knock them out. The whole immunome is another piece we haven't talked about that's starting to be measured. There's something called the Human Immunome Project, and we're starting to quantify that as well. And a lot of the future of oncology is being driven by immunotherapies that are getting more personalized. But back to the digital twin and what it's going to mean to do a vaccine. A vaccine, we're familiar with vaccines for the flu or COVID, identifying fragments of a flu virus or a COVID surface molecule that we develop now quite effective vaccines for. Similarly, some cancers have similar markers on the surface or ones that are personalized to a particular cancer, and we can develop vaccines and now using AI and machine learning that could be highly specific to a patient, or in some cases, more broad acting. We know that human papillomavirus, which often causes cervical cancer, the vaccine's available, Gardasil, I think it's called. And most young women are taking that, which dramatically lowers their risk of cervical cancer downstream. And there are other examples as well if the whole anti-vax movement doesn't take us off of science and true impact.
Did you know Dr. William Li?
Well, yeah. Food is medicine. He keynoted my conference before, yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so Dr. William has been on the podcast, and he talked about seeing, again, immunotherapy and the advent of these amazing immuno-oncologies that have come to market, giving us the possibility of taking people from stage 4 to stage 0. When do you think that is going to be a constant in the cancer and the oncology space?
Well, again, oncology very broad. Certain cancers, lung cancer to breast cancer to others have very different challenges, different needs. William Lee, we overlapped a bit at Mass General. We both trained in internal medicine. And to look back where we were when we were residents 20-something years ago to what's possible today is interesting. You don't want to have a failure of imagination. And I think, even HIV, which I remember as a medical student, was pretty deadly. Now it's basically cured. Essentially, still have to take your meds, but now insurance companies aren't even dinging you for having that anymore. So could we make that equivalent shift for many cancers? And I think, with the combination of sometimes food is medicine, which Dr. Lee is a proponent of, smart personalized immunotherapies, and sometimes, chronic new ways of monitoring cancers and making them a chronic disease. They pop up, they change, they mutate, and you have another drug off the shelf or immunotherapy or other construct that can hyper-personalize your cancer journey and care. So too broad to say all cancers will be cured, but when you can start to be multimodal with therapies, radiation, multimodal meaning there's chemotherapy and surgery and radiation are your kind of standards. And now we're adding in immunotherapies, potentially cell-based therapies, medical implants. There's a whole new sort of construct of precision oncology, which I think could eventually take some cancers and truly cure them. Though again, the best cure is never to get it in the first place or to pick it up at the stage where you aren't at stage 4. And sadly, most patients in the US and the rest of the world often present at late stage because we're not screening effectively or in an effective personalized way, or it's not accessible to huge swaths of the world population.
Daniel, you are one of the most respected physicians in the world. Okay, I'm not putting that lightly. And I think it's really important with these next questions that all our listeners listen with interest, because there is so much noise in the space right now. And I find it difficult bringing on experts to discern the truth. And I'm the one listening to really the top people in the space. So I'm going to ask you a few questions around that. I think the first thing is, again, around the anti-vaxxer movement. Do they have anything right? Was there anything wrong, for example, with the COVID vaccine? Was it released too quickly? We know that a lot of what's happened around the anti-vaxxer movement has been focused on the COVID vaccine, but it's actually then led to other people not giving their kids other vaccines that are perfectly safe. And so it's done a lot of damage itself. However, yeah, well, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the COVID vaccine, which came out essentially a year after the pandemic hit the world, was a credible example of biomedical innovation, collaboration, superconvergence, and having been built on generations of amazing science, right? It wasn't like we all of a sudden invented mRNA vaccines or immunology. And I think it's been quite tragic how some technologies like social media have made certain, let's say, non-scientific podcasters often the voice of science or adoption or fear-mongering. So I don't want to get into specifics of one study or another, but I think it's very, 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 very clear that the COVID vaccine, and especially how quickly it came out, is saved millions of lives, and morbidity and mortality. But like anything else, any vaccine or any therapy is going to have some side effects, or some populations that have potential side effects that are going to get picked up on. And there's always a balance for any therapy. That's when you go to surgery, you hopefully will save your life, or you could die. That's not the case in many vaccines. So I would say the tragedy is the voices of the anti-vaxxers, who in most cases have published debunked, misrepresented journal articles, are now the ones running the CDC Vaccine Advisory Board, who a couple of days before we're having this discussion, are now recommending to take away hepatitis B vaccines for kids based on no real data, based on fear-mongering, which is going to lead to kids dying of hepatitis later in life. That's one small example. We're not getting their measles vaccine. So I won't keep riffing on this. I think we're being now led by, in some cases, fear and folks who are anti-science with certain agendas, in some cases making money on this. And the fact that we have RFK Jr. as our U.S. lead for health and human services is at the beginning of a huge tragedy for biomedical science, which is now being defunded, including in the oncology world. mRNA vaccine work for cancers and beyond have been defunded or blocked from NIH. We have a huge challenge going forward, and we think we need the world community to come together to support science and health, including the vaccine movement, which is the biggest public health measure ever. I mean, public health and vaccines have led to the most increase in health span and lifespan on the planet historically, and will continue to do so.
What do you think is the missing piece right now? Because there is a huge disconnect. Mm-hmm. It's palpable, the disconnect between, I'm not going to say which side, but both sides.
There shouldn't be a side. We should be science and truth-based. It's not like
we're in the time of sides, unfortunately.
It seems to be, if you have a certain color, like you red associated, you're often, the zip codes that voted for Donald Trump had much higher mortality and morbidity in the COVID pandemic than those who voted more on the blue side of the equation. That's kind of interesting, right? When you get your news from Fox, FAUX News about health from folks who have an agenda that is not science and evidence-based, this is where it's taking us. And the larger tragedy is we're now defunding science in the United States, at the NIH level especially. That's going to impact the current and next generation of, let's say, clinician scientists, which are going to build the next mRNA-type tools that are hopefully going to prevent the next pandemic from occurring, or have a way to manage it in more effective and less challenging ways. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think it needs all of us to be open-minded and realize that science evolves. It's not what someone said 10 months ago and you said this and it's changed. Well, the evidence may have changed. It's learning some basics biostatistics and understanding how to read a paper, and being careful to understand who's messaging something and what's in it for them.
This is really important to hone in on, because when I look at the world and where we're going, I believe that disinformation and misinformation are the greatest curveballs of our time. There is so much innovation and opportunity, and yet it might all go to shit because of whatever's getting shared. And so Just one last thing on the COVID vaccine, because I had Issa Malhotra on the podcast recently. He talks a lot about vaccine injury and very controversially said that the reason that King Charles got cancer was in part due to the COVID vaccine. The reason why I'm asking this question is I want you to dispel this uptick that we're seeing in COVID vaccine. I want you to dispel what he said, at least in part, for those that want the truth.
I don't know him specifically or what data he may have cherry-picked, but correlation is not causation, right? I posted a funny fake study the other day that, 90% of children who have autism were breastfed or had formula milk. Okay, did formula milk or breastfeeding cause autism? Probably not. King Charles and many others have developed cancer, and they may or may not have had a COVID vaccine. They're not necessarily associated. And in many cases, we know that preventing certain infectious diseases with vaccines lowers your risk for certain cancers. One related to brain span and Healthspan and Alzheimer's is the vaccine for shingles, which seems to show that folks who've had their shingles vaccine have a much lower propensity for developing dementia. So, and shingles, as you might know, is reactivated chickenpox. And now there's a chickenpox vaccine. So if you had a chickenpox vaccine as a kid, you probably will never even need a shingles vaccine. But to dispel the myths, and there's too many, I think people cherry pick data. They are not coming from a place of looking for the truth, but looking to prove some point that vaccines cause autism, when in case it's been debunked many times. So I'm not the right voice to give you all the evidence bases. I just think it's bold to all of us, if we really want to see true health and medicine for all, to validate the science in smart ways, to listen to people who really are trained in the space and not get your science from Joe Rogan.
Yeah. And I think one of the issues that you find in the biohacking space is that when one says that they are a doctor, a physician, it's almost like they're a bit institutionalized. Have to take a step back and pour them because they've been institutionalized. But there is some truth in that. There's a reason for people saying that the truth might be 1% or 10% or whatever, but there is a tiny bit of truth in that, because anyone who has spent a lot of time in an institution is going to be somewhat conditioned. However, there is definitely a lot of a lack of truth in what they're saying. Is it a system that needs changing?
I mean, everyone grows up or goes through, if you're going through professional education, to a certain system, whether it's law or medicine or journalism or any realm. So people tend to want to keep the norm. I mean, people generally often don't want the cheese move, particularly if it impacts their bottom line. I don't think there's some global conspiracy from pharma to, keep people sick and sell them more drugs. But there is a business model around, if you're a hospital CEO, you want to have your beds filled. You're not trying to, if you have a chronic disease medication like Ozempic or other GLP-1s, you don't necessarily want people to just take that for a month and come off of it. So there's business models that are often misaligned with overall health and medicine. And there's definitely things that can change there, particularly when you change your incentives. You get what you pay for. Yep. And if you start to pay for outcome-based care, not just for prescribing the drug, if you build new forms of doing clinical trial and after trial tracking, you can show in more evidence-based ways that something that may have gotten through the FDA truly is effective. Because in many cases, drugs are only effective for a percentage of patients who take them. So there's lots of ways to improve potentially the system. The trick is, what voices do you give to manipulate that, and what is their underlying motivations? And in many cases, those seem misaligned. Even folks who've been on your podcast, they're there to sell something in some cases. They have their own agenda. They'll cherry pick their own studies, or they may have been self-published, and they're claiming that their anti-aging therapy is the cure for all, and so it's complicated.
So for our listeners and myself, what should we look out for?
Well, you can't necessarily fact check everybody in real time, myself included. But if someone's claiming that Magic Potion X is going to improve Healthspan and your sex life and your gout and your immune system and pick everything under the sun. And, the studies are based on some preclinical paper from 10 years ago or some non-randomized trial that's over-extrapolated, caveat emptor. I come from a stem cell regenerative medicine background. My clinical training is in bone marrow transplantation. That's just a truly effective form of stem cell therapy. But now you hear on the news all the time, a stem cell therapy for X, Y, and Z, and people are going and spending real time in dollars and sometimes even losing their lives going to the Caribbean to get a stem cell therapy. Well, what kind of stem cell? What dose? How is it delivered? What mechanism of action? These are broad statements that have been sometimes overhyped. And, listen, almost everybody wants to live a long, healthy life. And it's easy to want to go down this simple path. It's often difficult to integrate the evidence base to show that something is truly effective. Even something is now in the zeitgeist, improving Healthspan. What do you measure? Is it your telomeres? Is it your wrinkles? Is it your aging clocks? Is it, your grip strength? What do you measure? And do we need new forms and trials to show that some of these things are truly effective? So no simple answer. I just think you need to look at the evidence base and look at the claims and see if they line up. And when they don't line up, they should be temporized, or the work should hopefully go forward that can show what's claimed is truly going to potentially happen.
I think the issue there, from what you're saying, is that it's difficult enough if you are in the space and a leader, let alone for someone who has absolutely no idea what to do.
Right.
So there has to be some sort of system change, and there has to be. And when you're talking about the reimbursement and the beneficiaries of this, there has to be some system change at a high level. I don't know whether it's regulation.
Yeah, I mean, the regulators are often behind the curve. Regulators are often driven by the policies set by, let's say, the U.S. Senate and Congress, of which there's like one PhD in all of Congress and a couple of wackadoodle physicians. So who's set to understand how do you set the regulatory pathways for AI meets digital meets software as a medical device? There have been some advancements. I'm not saying the regulatory bodies aren't trying to improve, but there's a lot to learn. And as we futurescape, you want to build regulatory reimbursement and evidence-based systems that are living in the future, not in today's fax machine era where most of our health data is still shared on fax machines and DVDs. So it's often infrastructure and models and how we share data that's going to drive true insights and advancement.
Evidence-based. You've said that a number of times. What does evidence-based mean to you? Because I think a lot of people have different definitions.
Sure. Evidence-based doesn't mean someone jumps on an AI-generated Instagram channel and says, take the supplement and it's going to improve X, Y, and Z, or make you live forever, or improve your immune system or memory. Evidence-based means, well, what is the active ingredient or ingredients in that supplement, right? Is there some logical mechanism of action whereby that it could improve your brain health or your longevity or health span? Has it been shown in some preclinical and then hopefully clinical study? Is that study randomized or not? Is it anecdotal? I see a lot of these sort of health influencers peddling stem cell therapy or gene therapy, and I felt great, and Sally's mom felt great as well, and so these small anecdotes are compelling, but they don't often meet statistical significance or proof points, and so clinical evidence is hard to generate. It's expensive, and I think reimagining how we collect that information and allowing people to crowdsource and build those health maps might be part of that solution moving forward.
Are there 2 or 3 things that you would recommend for everyone to do?
I think it's easy to say, but to be proactive and not hyperactive in terms of your own health, doing all those commonsensical things to improve your health span, exercise, sleep when you can get it, good nutrition as available, social connection, sense of purpose. Those are not the expensive, or exercise especially, expensive super drugs that many folks want to sell you. There's no easy button for almost anything, right? We're seeing some potentially magical things happening with GLP-1s. It doesn't mean all these other peptides people are trying to sell you are going to have equal or similar impacts. It takes years to develop sometimes the database for these elements. And again, whether it's metformin or rapamycin or pick your magic potion that might work for some small or segmented set of the population based on age, genomics, other risk factors. It might not work at all or be dangerous for others, right? Depending on how your immune system's tuned, depending on other elements of your digital twin. So I'm really excited about the potential for, let's say, the longevity, escape velocity to occur. You've talked about that in prior podcasts. You know, you live another 30 years, a lot's going to change. I mean, the last 10 years were pretty exciting. The next 10 years will make the last 10 years look slow. So I don't want to be one of those folks to be over cautionary. I just think there is a danger sometimes to jumping too fast to things that sound too good to be true.
Around stem cells, around gene therapy, are there protocols, are there companies that you would recommend?
Oof, that's a loaded question. I don't think there are any sort of FDA cleared gene therapies for longevity. I know you've had guests on who've discussed their own personal experiences. I don't think those quite yet meet the metric of being proven out in a properly controlled trial at scale. I think what is interesting on the gene therapy side now with CRISPR, I mean, what an extraordinary technology. I've met Jennifer Doudna, the Nobel laureate, a few times, and it was only something that was sort of came out of the lab like 14 years ago. And now you have, we had one of our faculty at NextMed Health was Jimmy, and my friend Patrick, who's a pulmonary ICU doc, who a year ago climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And it was not too hard for my pulmonary critical care doc in his 40s to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, but he brought with him Jimmy, who until 5 years ago had sickle cell disease, but using a CRISPR-based bone marrow transplant, now is cured of sickle cell disease. That is a great example of science in action, you know, with a well understood, you know, single gene disease. Many diseases are much more complicated on the genomic spectrum. We're now seeing the advent of, you know, CRISPR GPT, the ability to maybe design gene therapies or new base editing technologies coming from David Liu at Harvard and Broad Institute, which might really end up being able to back a whole wider range of rare diseases where you can start to reprogram biology in the body. One example, as we're thinking about common diseases, our first leading killer is still cardiovascular disease. There's a certain set of population that has super high cholesterol and develops carotid artery and clots and strokes very early. There's a company called out of Mass General where they're using a gene therapy in human trials now to modify the genes in the liver that are involved in making cholesterol. So these are going to be given to folks at stage 0 before they ever have developed heart disease and cardiovascular disease, because you'll be turning off their over cholesterol production. So that's moving upstream of the disease. And that's an exciting realm as well, because most of the gene therapies, whether it's for Healthspan or particular diseases, are often after the diseases have occurred. So that would be one example of where this might be heading. You're going to know your risks from early in life because you'll have been sequenced and had your multimodal data collected and modeled, maybe even as a 2-year-old. And in some cases, you might get that vaccine as a kid that's going to prevent you from getting the things that are very likely if you hadn't, whether it's a cognitive issue, cardiovascular, or a cancer.
So do you think an individual going to the Bahamas or wherever right now to do said therapy is net positive or net negative?
I think there's always often should be a right to try some of these therapies if they're well scientifically validated and have some evidence behind them. It's not like you need to wait for every regulatory in the world to approve them. I would say in many cases, though, ask the right questions. Are you getting stem cell therapy from a sheep, from embryonic stem cells, from induced pluripotent stem cells, from fat-based ones, from circulatory ones from your bone marrow? What is actually being done? And how might that help your joints or your cognitive abilities or your immune system? In many cases, there's not really any direct scientific evidence, maybe beyond some preclinical preprint. Secondly, if you are going to do something like that, ask, is it part of a clinical trial? If you're going to be going through a potentially helpful, potentially harmful procedure, hopefully that data being collected and build a knowledge set so that if it is effective or not effective, people learn and science and health can improve. So it's a broad question and it sort of depends. I think there are definitely some well-meaning folks trying to offer things that could be helpful. We just need to develop those evidence bases and realize that particularly in the stem cell world, there's a whole array of definitions and therapies.
Well, let's do a 101 on what they should look out for.
So a quick primer on stem cells. It sounds great. What is a stem cell? A stem cell is a cell that can divide and reproduce itself and also differentiate into a mature tissue, muscle, heart, cartilage, or in a combination of stem cells differentiating into an organ, right? But just injecting a stem cell per se doesn't mean it will be helpful. Adult stem cells are somewhat limited, like hematopoietic or blood-forming stem cell from your bone marrow. That's what we use in a bone marrow transplant because they can differentiate and expand into red cells, white cells, and platelets. That's the fundamental element of rebooting your immune system and treating many cancer patients. A fat-based stem cell or mesenchymal stem cell may or may not be able to, in the right conditions, turn into cartilage or bone or muscle. But many stem cell therapies go into some clinic giving you cord blood-based hematopoietic stem cells or fat-based mesenchymal stem cells or ones developed from embryonic stem cells, even your own, doesn't mean those are going to have a clinical benefit. Just putting them in your bloodstream or injecting them into a joint is not going to turn into a heart or into insulin-producing beta islet cells. So there's a lot of sophistication in understanding what kind of stem cell, what kind of dose, how is it delivered. In many cases, you don't want to deliver the stem cell. You want to develop the nerve cell that comes from that to maybe help with a spinal cord injury. So it's a complex area, and many folks oversimplify it, saying I'm going to a stem cell clinic to improve my longevity. And in many cases, the science doesn't make much sense to connect any of those dots. And in some cases can be dangerous, where those cells can, often not from you, can turn into essentially a cancer or a growth inside that body.
How real is that?
It's happened in a few cases in the eye, where folks have delivered, I believe, not fully differentiated cells and caused a growth in that eye from an allogeneic source, meaning not from the patient themselves. So there's a lot of caveats. In many cases, the cells are injected, or in some cases now exosomes, and they get distributed, picked up by your liver, and they disappear within an hour. What would that do for you? In some cases, in some clinics, they're being delivered with a steroid injection or vitamin B12. And yes, people feel great for a week or two later, as would anybody who gets a shot of steroids. So what else is coming with that cocktail? And I know you've talked to Dr. Jordan Schlane. He's given examples of where some supplement, et cetera, may have a little bit of active ingredient, but also have heavy metals and other things, herbicides mixed in, which may have temporarily some clinical benefit or symptomatology benefit, but in the long run could actually be quite deleterious. You want to move fast and break things, maybe if you're starting Facebook in the early days, but not when you have people's lives and health involved. And given the hype and hope and need and the fact that all of us are aging and probably no one's going to live forever, we can have a goal of extending health span, but doing that in a way that is truly going to do that without taking advantage of people, and in a way that can actually advance science and medicine. I've been involved with X Prize for many years. As you might know, there's a $101 million Healthspan X Prize. They're still trying to figure out how do you actually measure improvements in Healthspan, but it's an interesting catalyst. And in the last, you've had Aubrey de Grey on as well. I met 20 years ago when no one was thinking about longevity in the same way. It's now in the zeitgeist. And now that we have these new, sometimes godlike tools like protein folding out of DeepMind and new forms of mRNA vaccines and 3D printed scaffolds. You don't have a failure of imagination of what might really be able to catalyze new forms of prevention, diagnostics, and therapy that will really extend health span, et cetera. Sometimes stem cells will be involved. And there's a lot of amazing energy in there. It just needs to be, I think, not overhyped, and make sure that we have rigorous science beyond them before you start, let's say, experimenting. Be very careful before rushing into things that are not proven, may have promise, but will still sometimes take years or even decades to sort out. I think, though, I'm an optimist that there will be some incredible innovations coming forward at this super convergence of digital biology, synthetic biology, the ability to design drugs that are hyper-personalized, this N-of-1 medicine where no one's getting the same one-size-fits-all cocktail, but we'll be getting the drug or combination of elements that are truly hyper-personalized to you. And just to give you a short story of where I think that goes, actually I went to Aubrey de Grey SENS conference in Cambridge, 20 years ago, and I was showing that early studies about rapamycin and metformin. I thought, well, I bet you not everyone's going to need the same dose of metformin or rapamycin, or maybe even aspirin, or pick some other biologic that might be helpful. You're going to need your personalized cocktail, John, Sally, Daniel, Julian, we all might need a different dose or combination and different timings. And so that's when I popped into my head this idea of personalized poly pills, because folks, some of which we've had on the podcast, who are taking 20 plus supplements a day. But is that really dosed for them? Is that easy to take? Imagine you could have your Julian longevity capsule with your special dose of rapamycin and metformin and baby aspirin and statin and other things that would really, for you with an evidence base, extend your healthy health span. It's easy to take. It's once a day. It might even be printed at home and modified at home based on you. So that was sort of my little vision of the future of not just longevity medication, but for managing many chronic diseases. And I think the way we practice medicine today is still often pretty much one size fits all, not yet taking advantage of a lot of the insights and information that are becoming more available, but don't yet integrate into our workflows and our models of medical education and translation.
So protein folding from DeepMind.
Right.
What are the technologies that you are really excited about that are coming to market?
Around protein folding?
Just in general. I was giving an example.
What was remarkable, I did on a flight watch the documentary about Demis Hassabis and developing DeepMind and addressing the protein folding problem, which seemed completely insurmountable a decade ago. And now it's here and really shifting how biomedicine is going to be done. I am pretty excited about, that's an example of AI being applied to protein folding and soon designer drugs and vaccines. And there's a large array of companies now applying those sorts of tool sets to predict disease models, to develop new drug targets, to develop new biologics, antibodies, et cetera. So we're thinking this early new renaissance of being able to really speed up finding the right drug, doing virtual clinical trials first on, virtual models of individual patients, and then even doing smarter, faster clinical trials. And so we could see a whole new renaissance of new approaches to many diseases, again, at that convergence of synthetic biology, AI, vaccines, and beyond.
Where does ASI and the Metaverse and AR, VR, all that stuff take us?
I think the Metaverse, or this idea of spatial computing, can take us in all sorts of interesting ways around health and medicine. One, I was one of those guys who got the Apple Vision Pro the second it came out. Yeah, it's still a bit heavy, still a bit kludgy, but pretty magical. And one of my favorite demos on there was built by a psychiatrist out of Cedars-Sinai called Zaya. And you put the headset on, you're passed through, we're sitting in the same room, and then this kind of robotic psychologist pops up in front of you, is really good at having a conversation. My wife's getting a master's in psychology, so that's pretty spot on. And also, you're talking about stress or some problem, and it can build the environment around you. You can go to a meditative zone. And it's an example of using an augmented tool. It doesn't have to be Apple Vision Pro. It could be many others, which can bring a virtual agent to you. In this case, for mental health, which is a huge unmet need now and, around the planet, to have a augmented psychologist, not to replace your psychologist, psychiatrist, but to augment them. In many cases, people don't have access or could see one once a month if they're lucky. So that's just an early example of an augmented experience where you could bring an augmented being or train a virtual surgeon with collaborators around the world in a surgical space. Speaking of the surgical space in augmented reality, now we're seeing surgeons being guided using augmented and virtual reality through a surgery where they can sort of see through the patient and be doing procedures step by step, learning from thousands of surgeries that were successful and not successful to guide their surgical capabilities so they can be upskilled. We're seeing now what used to be a very expensive headset being shrunk onto the Meta glasses where you could do basic augmented reality. It's going to get better and better. And that can upskill all of us. It can give us health metrics. It can be used by a primary care doc to be having a face-to-face conversation, but pulling up vitals and labs and other insights that might be relevant. So I think these sorts of ways to sort of blend modalities will be helpful, for medical education, for training, for upskilling, also for therapy. You can use augmented virtual reality in the VR headset now for treating pain. A platform called Snow World, where burn patients would throw snowballs at penguins and need to know pain meds, or for engaging in physical therapy. So that's kind of a interesting world where gaming and IT and imaging and now AR and VR and AI are all blending together to build in sometimes real-time environments that can be really engaging to help with many elements of healthcare.
What will the next Daniel Kraft TED Talk be about?
That's a good question. Most of my talks have been about kind of connecting the dots and doing a little horizonscaping. I went back and watched my 2011 TED Talk, The Future of Medicine. There's an app for that. And most of what I talked about back in 2011 is sort of here now. So it's like, wow, the future's arriving. So what's next? And I think part of what's next isn't, again, about crazy, amazing technologies, but making it more seamless, that kind of design thinking, that Uberization or the Waymo experience of care. And that care can start to happen anywhere, right? And that in your smart tablet or smart medical tricorder in rural Rwanda or rural California, you can bring care to anybody. And leveraging AI and multimodal insights, you don't need to be a fully trained neurosurgeon to do the procedure. You don't have to have a psychiatrist there. We're hearing an airplane fly over. Most airplanes now, including mine, can fly by autopilot, right? You still want a human there in the loop, especially for landing and takeoff, but the planes now can pretty much even do that by themselves. So I think now it's about more translational science, getting these technologies that have often exist in sometimes solid ways to be integrated into holistic whole person care, not the sort of fragmented sick care models we have today. So I think that the future talk would be about sort of connecting those dots and bringing the future a bit faster, back to being a Now-ist. We shouldn't have to wait, because waiting a month or a year or a decade costs lives and potential and health and happiness, particularly for folks who are underserved today.
When you do your work, who is the one person you think about the most?
It sounds a bit of a cliche. I think about my kids and what world do you want them to be in 20, 30, 40 years, or 50 years. I mean, we hope that the kids born today will easily live to 100, but we have lots of societal and other challenges. I think about the future of education. I've got a kid out of college, 2 or 8 years before they'll get to college. What is it going to be educated? What kind of skills do you need today, whether you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a journalist, and how do you instill the love of learning and doing, when in some cases we can get supplanted by technology? This idea of being de-skilled. There's a famous quote from Sam Altman, the co-founder of OpenAI, that ChatGPT is like an e-bike for your mind. And lots of kids around here are riding, sometimes overweight kids, riding e-bikes everywhere. So what happens when your kids never learn how to ride a regular bike, or never develop their biking muscles in the first place? What do they lose out on, both from cardiovascular fitness as well as the ability to pedal and get around? Or a medical student who never learns to develop a differential diagnosis by themselves. Or we're seeing in the medical realm now, GI doctors, folks who do your colonoscopy, who are using AI to find lesions that might have been missed. When they don't have the AI filter on, they're losing their ability to do it just with their eyeball. So what are we going to miss out on when technology can do so much? Humanoid embodied robots are coming, for God's sakes, which will start cleaning our houses and doing our operations. So what's it going to be like to be a human in the future? And how do we set, at least on the healthcare side, set up the mindsets and the collaborations and the people to come together to build a better foundation for health and medicine for all of us?
You've mentioned Aubrey de Grey a few times. Do you think we'll reach this longevity, escape velocity, this biological, physical immortality in our lifetimes?
Our lifetime. So, if we look back, to 50 years from now, 50 years before us, 50s in the 60s and 70s, what do we have, right? What's evolved dramatically? I think in 50 years, it's almost like science fiction, right? What seemed science fiction to my grandmother, who was born in 1903, the same year the Wright brothers flew. So again, not to have a failure of imagination, I think there will be the ability to dramatically start to tune our aging. I think it's starting to accelerate. A lot of hype, a lot of hope, some snake oil, a lot of snake oil in the mix right now. But I think there's enough energy and convergence that even in a decade, even maybe sooner, with AGI coming on board, that we might be really surprised about what's going to be possible.
What is the advice you're giving to your son, daughter that's 9, 10 years old right now?
To my 9 and 11-year-old boys, is to become good learners, like try an instrument, right? Learn to code. One of my kids wants to be a video game designer. Other wants to be a Lego engineer. I'm like, well, you probably should still learn the fundamentals of math and pay attention in school. but also start to be creative and use these tools a bit early, right? It's fun to make an AI piece of art on Gemini or on Sora, but how might they use this to expand their creativity at the same time, still doing pen and paper and drawing and being kids and not being overpressured to get into college? So I think probably the most important skill sets later will be adaptable and be a fast learner and a good integrator. So that's one thing I think about. And then what are, we talked a bit about augmented reality. When my kids were younger, I put on these augmented reality t-shirts where you can have an iPad and show them inside their body and give them a flavor of what health was or how physiology worked, even when they're 4 or 6 years old. And just to give them some level of understanding about what you do health-wise has long-term benefits or impacts, and to be proactive about that even now when you're a 10-year-old, about getting your exercise in and mindfulness and reading a good book and making friends and having passions.
You live or currently live on Sand Hill Road, or just off Sand Hill Road,
Right.
which for people that don't know it, I don't know how much of the world's capital has been raised on these streets, or this actual street, but I don't know, it must be somewhere around half, but it's a large number. So you must have insights when ASI, AGI is coming, or maybe not. What do you think will be the greatest impact of AGI on health, on our health?
I think it's back to something I made a point about earlier, is that health is not going to become something that's intermittent and happens once a year if you're lucky enough to go and get your primary care clinic checked. It could become something that's sort of integrated into our life, not sick care, but true health care and self-care. And then that we'll again learn much earlier in our health spans what we're at risk for, and we can be proactive about it. Now, that's not a magical prediction. How that gets operationalized and paid for is a whole other challenge. But I'm hopeful that everyone's going to have access to self-health. They'll be able to do their health anywhere, anytime, and it becomes something that's matching you and your desires and your community. And that doesn't take AI robots to make that occur. That can happen in many cases now. So back to being a Now-ist. Don't wait for the future to arrive. A lot of these tool sets and skills and components are out there. Sometimes it takes some digging to find the ones that match you and your personality type and your budget without flying to the Caribbean to get stem cell injections.
What parting piece of advice would you like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I would say in terms of the health realm, if you're an innovator, it's a pretty exciting time. There's plenty of pain points to solve for. And I think whether it's in healthcare or any other realm, you can see a problem now and vibe code an app to address it, or 3D print a prototype. But to have the mindset of crossing disciplines, seeing that many fields from AI and robotics and 3D printing and stem cells and nanotech to virtual reality are all moving quite quickly. So when they come together, when they super converge, that's where the exciting opportunity is to reshape and reimagine and reinvent things. And that almost anybody now can, innovation is becoming democratized. Yeah. And so you can develop something for yourself, for your family members, for your community. It might be health related. You might design that little health related app for reminding you to walk your dog, which is good for your mental health and your dog's health. I'm not sure what it might be, but we can all become solution makers and need knowers and collaborate with folks who can build those solutions to scale. And then second part is, still stick with the basics. Don't wait for the magic pill to arrive. When someone does present that magic pill to you, look at it with some discerning eye, and maybe don't jump too quickly to take the magic love potion number 9. Be part of the community that helps prove these things out. And I think collaboratively we can build a better health and health span for everybody on the planet.
Daniel, thank you so much for your time.